But I think the misconception and one of the myths of NAD is that we make less of it as we age. But it's not that our body like suddenly forgot how to make NAD. It's that we're having more things that are consuming our NAD and more things that are vying and competing for that NAD store. So instead of having most of your NAD going to good things like DNA and sirtuins, you have more inflammation. So I think as you age, everybody has more inflammation. We have more cancer cells, we have more fat cells, we have more senescent cells. Those things are equally wanting your energy, right? They want to stay turned on and they want your NAD as the good guys. So I think that's what we really need to be paying more attention to is how do we stop the depletion rather than how do we refill the bucket? Because as we age or as we have more disease or illness, that's our challenge, not that we're making less NAD.
All right. Well, it's a real pleasure to have Courtney Van Bussum on the show today. Welcome.
Hi, Zora. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here and chat with you about some of our favorite cellular pathways.
Yes, I am so ready to dive into NAD again. I must have like 3 episodes, 4 episodes just dedicated to NAD because it's got different, people have different views about it. And I would like to just confuse my audience even more and like give them all the data rather than just choosing a side. But before we get into the science and get too deep, I want you to explain just in simple terms what NAD actually is and then why it's important for energy, longevity, and overall health.
Yeah, definitely. So let's just start simple. NAD is found in every single cell of your body, right? So that tells you that it's pretty important, anything that's in every cell. The actual name is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, but nobody really cares about that. And what NAD is, it's a coenzyme. Basically, it's a helper molecule that plugs into enzymes to help them do their jobs. And so what makes it really effective at this being a helper is that it alternates between its two forms. So you actually never have just NAD, right? You have NAD plus or NADH. So you have either the reduced form or the oxidized form. And that's important because redox is really our cell's whole homeostasis mechanism. And so I like to say that NAD is our cell's ultimate redox molecule because it's so good at giving and sending electrons. And so that ability to move electrons around, and this is, I won't go too deep into science, but basically electron transport is how we make energy, right? That electron transport chain is moving electrons to make energy and also to repair our systems. So that's kind of at the heart of everything we do. And you need to move electrons to turn food into energy, fundamentally. In cells terms, make ATP. So I wanted to take credit for this analogy as I was prepping for this, but I have to give GPT credit, but I really liked it. As it said, if ATP is the money your body spends, then NAD is the banking system that makes the transactions possible. So
Ah,
without NAD carrying those electrons back and forth, you can't actually like cash in your glucose, your fats, your ketones. You might have a lot of raw oil, but you don't actually ever make it into gasoline that your car can drive on. So I really liked that kind of way of processing. That's why NAD is so important because it's critical to moving everything around to get to your energy.
but can I ask you where would mitochondria fit in that analogy? Do you think?
Well, because so that electron transport chain to actually make your ATP, right? Your mitochondria are what make your ATP. So that's happening inside of the mitochondria. That's that process to actually build the energy currency that then is fueling the rest of the systems.
Okay. So your NAD and mitochondria are just both super important for making energy. And it's
Right.
not just the energy that we feel because we always seem like, oh, I have energy or I'm fatigued. It's energy to be able to have thought processes or for cells to have function and metabolic
Right.
processes, so many things. It's not just the energy we feel.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not just like energy and that like I'm excited to go on a run. It's literally energy as the fuel to do anything. So that extends to repair, right? That's another place NAD is really critical, is it's powering the repair crews like your sirtuins. It's helping to regulate your PARPs, which are what repair DNA. So it's protecting your mitochondria, it's calming inflammation, it's keeping your cells resilient. That's all needs energy, right? Like you have to have energy to do those things.
Mhm.
So to kind of extend it out, right? When NAD is low, basically the economy slows down. Like energy is harder to produce, repair takes longer, recovery feels sluggish. So that's why NAD is such a central like part of this conversation, not just like day-to-day energy, but also long-term health, longevity, and
Mhm.
beyond.
So NAD is always difficult to measure unless you're in a lab. So would it be correct to say if someone's feeling really fatigued that perhaps they're low on NAD? I mean, we know it could be many things, but would that be one of the signs?
Yeah, I think one of the parallels that I'll draw that's very much related to that. So our mitochondria, if they're not functioning well, then you're going to feel fatigued, right? And so something that is then inhibiting mitochondrial dysfunction means I can't convert my NAD into energy, and there may not be a lot of NAD ready to heal, to give me energy to support my fatigue. We see a lot of NAD depletion in COVID, which is really related to, in long COVID, related to fatigue. And that's because your energy and your mitochondria aren't turned on to make energy. And to go off of that a little bit more too, where what you said, it is hard to measure NAD. And the reason for that is because, like I mentioned, there's NAD plus and there's NADH. And really what you care about more is the ratio. And that ratio also is different in the blood and the serum, in the cell and the cytosome, and then in the mitochondria. So you have NAD in all these different forms in different places in the body. And we're looking at that intracellular, intramitochondrial NAD levels and those ratios. And so it's like a lot of the just tests that are looking at serum level NAD, it may not tell you much. So I think it's a lot more important to look at how are people feeling, what inflammation do they have. And there are a couple companies and labs that are looking to get to this granularity, which I think is helpful because it will help us from a research perspective, from a testing perspective, but it won't really help you or I in our day to day. It's just a number. And if we don't know why we're having that number, it's not going to really give us guidance into what to do about it.
You mentioned NAD plus and NADH. What are the differences?
Yeah, so they're two sides of the same coin. So redox, right? If that word from chemistry from back in the day, reduction, oxidation, and that's the giving and taking of electrons. So when NAD plus, that little plus sign, that actually means that it's oxidized. So it's missing an electron, right? An electron has a negative value to it. So when you remove that electron, now you have a positively charged molecule. So that NAD plus is a positively charged molecule. NADH is the flip side of that. It has gained an electron, so it's in its reduced format. And you need that because that's essentially what is triggering the sequence of electron movement, right? The plus wants to get an electron to go back to balanced. So it keeps gaining and losing electrons to process and basically make the different systems of the body work.
Mm, okay, because a lot of people talk about NAD plus, and I've heard that. And I don't get too many people talking about NADH, but it sounds like they're both important, like LDL or HDL. It's like we need them both for cholesterol production.
Right, yeah, they're the same molecule, they just have a different charge to them. And so one has a hydrogen added to it. I mean, I guess not technically exactly the same molecule, but when you look at like oxidative phosphorylation, right, how we make energy, that NADH is what starts and then it kicks out into NAD plus.
When you say NAD plus and you say that it's oxidized, it gives me like a negative connotation where you think, oh, well, we don't like oxidation. So, but when I think people are giving injections, NAD plus injections to people, like, well, what's going on here? Can you clear that confusion up for me?
Yeah, so there's not really bad or good associated with oxidation as it is alone, right? Like oxidized form versus a reduced form, you have to have both. Our cells want homeostasis, which is like that constant toggling back and forth between oxidation and reduction. And so to kind of give a little more clarity to this, think about an antioxidant, right? Antioxidants have gotten really touted as good because we have too much oxidation. And that's true. We do have way more things in our world causing stress to cause oxidation to the system. So we have to reduce that oxidation. But you can actually take too many antioxidants and actually put yourself into an overly reduced state because you need a little bit of stress, right? You need a little bit of oxidation. The cell is programmed to have a little bit of that hormetic stress effect to it. And so you want to kind of stay in between and not only be on one side of the fence. So when you say like NAD plus is oxidized, it's in its oxidized form. And that actually kind of gets into some of the other things we can talk about of, okay, if I put way too much of this oxidized form of NAD plus into the system, then what's happening? What's happening downstream? How is that redox balance adjusting to get back into balance? Because that's what the cell's always going to do. It's always going to try to go back to homeostasis. So if it's oxidized, then we'll find a way to reduce it and back and forth. So I think it's not in and of itself bad. It's just when we get too much of it without balancing it that we kind of lose our way.
Are people giving NAD plus injections or IVs or whatever it is that they're giving them when they say NAD plus? Because sometimes they like, no, we have NAD plus, not just regular NAD. Is it because they're trying to balance out the NAD they're trying to balance out the NADH overload?
I think it's more the stability of the molecule. I guess I don't know how much NAD is actually NAD plus. I mean, in general, I think when you say like an NAD plus infusion, it's a more stable molecule. I would need to go look at that. We don't usually get too much NADH because we're not supplementing NADH, but you can get too much NAD plus. But the ultimate thing when you're taking an infusion is that NAD molecule is not actually the same size or version of the NAD that's going into the cell. So I
Mhm.
think there's this misconception that like NAD that I take in an IV or an injection is the same NAD that gives my mitochondria fuel. It's not at all. It has to go through a bunch of different steps. It has to turn into its metabolites. It has to be processed to cross into the cell to be converted into intracellular NAD. So I think that there's this confusion about what is actually NAD and what's actually fueling the cell.
Okay. So can we assume that with age, we are just losing our NAD and that's a bad thing? Or do you think this is a very individual case by case?
So in general, as we age, yes, the research shows that we have less NAD available. But I think the misconception and one of the myths of NAD is that we make less of it as we age, right? But it's not that our body like suddenly forgot how to make NAD. It's that we're having more things that are consuming our NAD and more things that are vying and competing for that NAD store. So instead of having all of your NAD going to, or most of your NAD going to good things like DNA and sirtuins, you have more inflammation. So I think as you age, everybody has more inflammation. We have more cancer cells, we have more fat cells, we have more senescent cells. Those things are equally wanting your energy, right? They want to stay turned on and they want your NAD as the good guys. So I think that's what we really need to be paying more attention to is how do we stop the depletion rather than how do we refill the bucket? Because as we age or as we have more disease or illness, that's our challenge, not that we're making less NAD.
Oh, okay. So then, if let's say fat cells, inflammation, these things are eating up our NAD, then would somebody who is leaner or doesn't have excess fat, I mean, we need some fat, right? But we don't have excess fat, we don't have inflammation because they're, I don't know, working on their heart health or living in the outdoors more than indoors and I don't know, it's filtered air and water. Would those people then tend to have less, will have more NAD, or just their NAD is not being gobbled up as fast as someone who's got full of inflammation and unhealthy diet and lifestyle?
Definitely, right. Because I mean, NAD, so jumping a little bit ahead, but there's three ways that our body makes NAD, and one of them is called the salvage pathway, which is our primary way to get NAD. And so literally we recycle NAD. And if a system is working properly, so that healthy individual that you just talked about, then their recycling system is working. So they're every time they make NAD, they actually create something that then they make nicotinamide that is then used to make more NAD. And most of our NAD is coming from the salvage pathway. So if you're, like I said, the cell is really smart. So if you keep that recycling system turned on, then we would assume that person has higher NAD levels because it's feeding enough NAD to the places it needs to go.
It sounds a little bit like autophagy or mitophagy, where the body tends to recycle its clean up and recycle its own molecules. And I'm wondering, is there a word like an something autophagy, like NADophagy or something like
I
that?
haven't seen anything. I think mainly, yeah, that's a good question. It's more just the salvage. Like that's like the word that's used in NAD metabolism is salvage of your NAD because this salvage pathway is saving the NAD, right? It continues to reuse it, so it brings it back into the beginning of the cycle to feed back into NAD.
Is there any research showing that someone who is unhealthy, has too much inflammation in the body, and has measured their NAD, they found it's quite low. They're a bit older, obviously, because with age we can accumulate these things, and then change their diet and lifestyle, and then measured their NAD. And I'm talking about just research or in a lab, and seen that it's actually improved.
Not exactly because, like I said, it's hard to get the different levels. And I'm sure there is broader research out there, but what people are mainly looking for is proxies. So a lot of the research that I've looked at is looking at proxies to know whether that NAD system is online. So, like, for example, homocysteine, and we can talk about how that's related, but like inflammation markers like homocysteine, they'll reduce. So you'll see improved inflammation from a homocysteine level. There's enzymes that are upregulated in diseased states that are involved in this, like one's called CD38. We can measure that and it'll reduce. So I think more of the research, at least that I'm looking at, has been on that side of it because I'm looking at more of the intracellular mechanisms versus just a lot of the research that I found was more on the serum level NAD.
So, what would be a practical way for us to kind of guess if we're low in NAD or not? Because you mentioned homocysteine being one of those markers. What else can we do if we want to work with a doctor and say, let's test this to see if I'm producing NAD at a good rate or losing it too fast?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, because NAD is found in every cell in the body, like everybody can benefit from optimizing their NAD metabolism. It doesn't matter if you're healthy, you are aging every day, you have stressors against you every day, so your systems are going to be under attack. So it's more, let's look at how do we optimize it. So other markers that like when in our clinical setting that we see improved when we start to really focus on these NAD metabolites and the different aspects of NAD turning into or getting converted by enzymes, you'll see improved, like I said, homocysteine levels. You'll actually see improved lipid levels where like people's cholesterols will balance out. We'll also see reduction in C-reactive protein, like another inflammation marker. So it depends kind of where you're looking, but a lot of those typical inflammation markers are going to be a good proxy, as I said, because when you have dysregulated NAD, you have upregulation in these enzymes that are causing inflammation.
Okay. So yeah, we can make sure our homocysteine, our cholesterol levels, and all those lipid, I mean, not just cholesterol, but probably triglycerides and some of the other ones, MPO and oxy LDL and all these. You can take deep dives, ApoB, ApoA, but HSCRP is another one that these are good markers to look at anyways in general for your health. But it's interesting, yeah, that they could be linked to the enzymes that are gobbling up our NAD. Do you know of any correlations or associations of NAD levels or even the enzymes like CD38 that you mentioned and women in pre versus post menopause?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually went down a rabbit hole a little while ago because someone asked me about this and fertility. And I hadn't really dug too deep into the whole relationship between NAD, its precursors, postcursors, and fertility. But what I found relates a lot to this conversation on menopause. I think the connections between NAD, estrogen, and ovarian aging are kind of starting to be uncovered a little bit more, which makes sense if you think about, okay, so, and I'm sure you've talked a lot about this, but more and more we're seeing ovarian aging as kind of one of the first signs of aging because our ovaries age faster. And that's what then tips us over into more of this menopause side of life. And it makes sense when you
It's
look
the
at,
only, sorry, I just
go
interviewed
ahead.
Anna there in aging and she said and I didn't know this, it's the only organ in our body that sort of shuts down while we're still alive.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's kind of crazy, right? If your
Ages
brain
the,
just started doing that, like everyone would be freaking
yeah,
out.
it ages the fastest and then just kind of, yeah, goes to sleep, but it still has a lot of function even post menopause. So the message that I got was you can take out your ovaries or have somebody be like, you know what, you're 50, 60, 70, like you don't need your ovaries, not making babies. But in fact, they still are working. They are still doing something. They're just obviously not, they're shutting down for reproduction, but they
Right.
do a lot of things. Sorry, I had to interrupt you because it just made
No, no, it's
me.
super fascinating. Like I've also kind of gotten down that rabbit hole of like, why is that the case and what can we learn from ovarian aging that is indicative of overall aging? Because like it is
Yeah.
moving so much faster. But it makes sense from an NAD perspective to kind of tie it to NAD because it's a super energy hungry organ, right? Like to reproduce, to make a baby requires a lot of energy to go through a cycle in premenopause. So it requires a lot of NAD. And then the other piece, and I think this is to your point of like ovaries are also helpful after menopause, is because they're still kicking off estrogen, right? Like or they're still regulating an estrogen. So you need that estrogen for a lot of other things, as you well know. But one of the big things is for mitochondria. So estrogen is actually really important for mitochondrial modulation. And it helps you make more mitochondria, and then that helps increase your antioxidant defenses. And it's kind of this coach, if you will, for your energy efficiency. Like estrogen gives your mitochondria a lot of feedback to stay more efficient. So if you lose estrogen, then you're losing that coach for your mitochondria. They'll still be out playing, but they will have less guidance. They'll have less pep talks, right? Like the mitochondria won't be behaving as well if they don't have estrogen on board. And so you need to kind of keep estrogen alive to help with mitochondrial function to help utilize NAD appropriately. So they're all really related. And the other piece too is that CD38 enzyme. There was actually a study that I was looking at before this where they looked at it was in mice, but they saw that as CD38 ramped up with ovarian aging, they saw a direct correlation of ovarian NAD decline. So you get more of this inflammatory enzyme. It's consuming a lot of that NAD. You don't have as much NAD on board to help your ovaries function, and then therefore they start to decline. So it's a very like tight loop actually when you go down how is it related to that pre and post menopause. So in theory, keeping your NAD system running well can preserve your ovarian function, can help keep estrogen going, or keeping estrogen going can also help keep all of this going.
Hmm. I wonder if women who are taking estradiol or any kind of HRT, well, no, not any, probably they need estrogen on board, would they have less CD38 on more NAD?
I think so. I haven't looked for that study, but it would make sense that if you have hormone replacement and you have estrogen on board, you're telling your mitochondria to work better. And so therefore your NAD system is producing appropriately.
Yeah, in theory, it makes sense. Yeah, I'd love to see if there's any research on that. But okay, NAD has been called the fountain of youth molecule. That's why everybody's injecting it or taking a precursor. But you're the expert in cellular health, and I heard you say that simply putting NAD through IVs or injections may not be as safe as it sounds. So, what are the risks we are taking with this?
Yeah, well, so I think NAD could be the fountain of youth molecule if it's in the right ratios with the right pathways in a supported system. But like anything, and a lot of those fountain of youth stories, right? When you go and then you're like consuming all of it, it actually backfires. So my theme, and I'll keep saying it, but like the cell is designed and thrives in balance. So it knows intuitively what it should be doing, how it should be working through reduction and oxidation to stay homeostatic. So it needs a little bit of stress, right? That hormesis, but then it needs time to recover. And when it really doesn't do well is when it's flooded all at once with something. So this extends beyond an NAD infusion, but it's when you overexercise, when you overeat, like anything that's pushing us too far in one direction is when our cells have a hard time rebalancing. So some of the downsides, especially when you're talking about NAD through IVs or injections, is that you're getting this big bolus all at once, right? And you're creating this rapid redox shift. So whereas before we're kind of managing this way, all of a sudden I've got all this NAD on board, all this NAD plus, I have to get back into redox. So you get this trigger to the nervous system. It's basically kind of a mini fight or flight, which is why actually people get that excitatory response to an NAD infusion because they're actually a little bit stressed and their stress system, their fight or flight system comes on board. So they're like, oh, I got to be awake. I got to be alert because I have this autonomic stress happening. So one, just giving the cell all of this at once then ends up creating too much what's called nicotinamide. So nicotinamide is that form of vitamin B3. It's a supplement you can take, but that's the kind of primary molecule, the primary currency for your salvage pathway, which is how we get most of our NAD. So when you take a bunch of NAD at once, then you end up creating a lot of nicotinamide. And so your body has to figure out how to clear this, right? Because it's not prepared for that much all at once. And the way that it clears all of this is through methylation. So this is where NAD gets really tied into the methylation story, which I think is kind of an overlooked part of the conversation. But before we make NAD, we have nicotinamide. To remove the excess, we end up stealing from our methyl donors. So we go and we take a methyl group to methylate nicotinamide to clear it out. And in doing so, we actually create homocysteine. So that's the direct parallel to homocysteine. When we steal the methyl group, we end up creating homocysteine, and we've now stolen methyl donors from the places that need it. And so you have this twofold effect of like you have too much in the system, you're not actually getting enough NAD for it, and you can do a lot of damage by stealing methyl groups from DNA, from sirtuins, things like that. And you also, if you have more and more inflammation, then you create more and more CD38, which is going to consume your NAD. So now you're hitting it from both sides, right? You're eating the NAD, you're stealing nicotinamide, and now you've actually kind of ended up creating a more inflammatory state than a beneficial state.
Wow. That's so bad. Like, why doesn't anybody tell me this when they're telling me to take NAD? Like,
People just don't understand the pathways. As I think when you really dive down, I will say, like, the one caveat is I do think there's a place for an infusion if you are trying to recover from a severe stressor, right? Like, again, if I went into this dysbiosis, this imbalance, because I ran a marathon, because I got super sick, all of a sudden I used up a lot of NAD really quickly because I needed that energy. Maybe then doing an infusion or an injection to kind of bring some of that refill, if you will, makes sense. But definitely not doing it every week or every month because your body, your cell's just not designed to handle that.
mhm. Yeah, I know people who've done the NAD IVs and they're just like, I feel great, and they get all this energy, but it sounds like it's a little bit of a fake energy, or it's just to maybe get and maybe feeling better, but it seems to be very short-lived and it's very expensive on top of that. And the way that I understand is that we have this bucket and we're throwing more NAD in there. Imagine it full of NAD, but then there's all these holes in the bucket. And perhaps that could be the CD38 or it could be the lifestyle, it could be whatever it is. And all we're doing is just putting in more NAD, whether it's through precursors or direct NAD, but the bucket's eventually going to leak. So we would want to plug those holes ideally to get to the root cause of the issue and not just rely on NAD. But it sounds like what you're saying, it could be a really great target therapy short term, just for one thing in particular, but you still need to work on the salvage.
Right. You have to plug the holes. And that's exactly it. I mean, that's the analogy we use a lot. And as I've gotten more and more into this space, and not to confuse the situation, but there's maybe two buckets. One is your nicotinamide, because that's the precursor to NAD. And that's what you have to have on board to make NAD. And the other is NAD itself. And then there's two enzymes. One is CD38. That's poking holes in your NAD bucket, and the other is called NNMT, and that's poking holes in your nicotinamide bucket. So now you don't have anything to make NAD, and you're eating your NAD. So it's kind of this two hitting it from two sides, like I said, which can really have a detrimental effect.
Okay, so we got a couple of things to talk about here. We've been
I
talking.
do
Yeah,
one thought really quick, Zora. Sorry to interrupt you, because you did mention like the people feeling good on NAD
yeah,
IVs.
yeah.
And so I think it's actually a couple interesting pieces to it. One is, like we said, the redox stress response. But I also want to call out it's that methylation piece, right? And so, like I said, when you over inundate the methylation system with all of this nicotinamide, you actually kind of clog it up for methylating your neurotransmitters. So it slows down the neurotransmitter methylation, basically, so you don't break down those stimulants like dopamine or norepinephrine or epinephrine as quickly. So they end up hanging around a little bit longer. So you have these positive feely neurotransmitters that are sticking in your brain for a little bit longer because they're not getting processed at their normal rate. And so you end up feeling a little bit of this more euphoric aspect to it. So it's kind of, again, it's a short-lived benefit for a long-term detriment of you're plugging up a system that should be working naturally.
Maybe you can explain what's going on because I have a friend who is so crazy about this NAD plus injections. And she says, oh, I've given it to 100 people now, like friends, and people are trying it out. And she's convinced that it's helping not everybody not only feel better, but seeing real results. Like her husband's chest hair went from gray to black. Her brother has lost all this weight. And the stories just go on and on. And I mean, it's amazing. And I'm thinking, so what is really happening here? If this is true, because it sounds like it's not only feeling good, because the stories I usually hear is I feel more energy, NAD energy just makes perfect sense. But when you see or hear these stories of people having other results, what do you think is really happening in the body? And what does NAD have to do with it?
Yeah, it's probably specific to each individual in that, like, are they changing aspects of their lifestyle also? Because I see that a lot where it's like, because I started to do a biohack, then just by nature, you start doing other things. So I see that a lot. There is a case that maybe these individuals they were depleted from NAD because they had a lot of inflammation on board or they had other illnesses or things going on. And so they ended up converting some of that NADIV into actual usable NAD. So they're turning it on a little bit more than they had been had they done nothing else. So you get more of that NAD access immediately, but you're still causing these lower level ongoing inflammatory effects. So
Mhm.
it may be that we just don't see the impact. And that's a lot of this stuff, right? Like, yes, the NAD conversation has gotten really popular because NAD is important. And probably for somebody doing nothing else for their cellular system, putting NAD on board will have some positive effects because some of it will convert to NAD in the cell,
Mhm.
but we're ignoring all the potential downstream effects. So I'm not here to be like, this is like the only answer, but I think I'm trying to raise awareness to the fact that we are completely ignoring a lot of times in this conversation that there's other really balanced pathways that are getting disrupted that we don't really know what that's going to do in the long term. If you
Mhm.
think about if I have a couple cancer cells on board and some of my NAD ends up spilling out because those cancer cells are really hungry and looking to stay turned on and looking for energy, then maybe they're stealing some of that. So we just don't know.
Yeah, this is the discussion I want to have and take a little bit deeper because I've talked to this friend of mine. I'm like, did you hear about CD38 and then MNT and these could potentially be cancerous triggering or we don't really know. So let's talk a little bit more about these enzymes, CD38 and then NNMT. For people, if you're hearing this for the first time, they're like, NNM what? NNM, double N, M as in Mary, T. So what are these exactly? What roles do they play in the metabolism and why, what should we know about them?
Yeah, no, great question. So they're basically these two really important enzymes that kind of act like these hidden levers for how well NAD is working in the body. So you'll hear them come up a lot because of their direct role on NAD metabolism. So I'll start with CD38 because I think that one's a little simpler. It's basically an NAD consumer. right? So it burns through your NAD supply. And the kicker is that it tends to ramp up as we age or when inflammation is high. There's tons of studies out there that have shown that CD38 is elevated across the board, different disease states. It's very closely linked with inflammation. So this kind of means that the older we are, the more inflamed we are, the more CD38 we have, the more NAD is getting wasted, right? It's getting consumed up by this enzyme and it's not being preserved for the things that actually need the energy. So if we can calm CD38 down through lifestyle, through diet, things like that, we can actually help preserve these NAD pools, which translates to keeping our immune system going, keeping our mitochondria functioning better. So that's kind of the first player in the game, right? The CD38. And there are ways to block it, including some supplements like apigenin, polyphenols, but lifestyle and just reducing inflammation in general will go a long way. Secondly, is NNMT. So like you said, it's nicotinamide and methyltransferase. So that word methyl in there means it's related to methylation. So this enzyme, it actually works kind of before NAD, whereas like CD38 is eating the NAD that you've already created. This is, like I said, stealing the precursor to make NAD.
Mm.
So it's not allowing you to have enough nicotinamide on board to actually make NAD efficiently. It methylates that nicotinamide and converts it to well, it doesn't convert to, but in doing so, by stealing the methyl group from acetylmethionine, right? SAMe, that's your universal methyl donor. So it's going to take one of those methyl groups, it's going to methylate nicotinamide. In doing so, it actually then creates homocysteine, acetoadenyl homocysteine, and you're raising inflammation levels that way. So it uses up those methyl donors, so they're not available for neurotransmitter balance, like we just talked about, for detox, for DNA methylation. I think this is also really important for people who are poor methylators. So like you were talking about before this, like talking to GPT about all of this, if you have a COMT variant or you have an MTHFR variant and you're already a poor methylator, you're kind of already fighting an uphill battle. Now you've thrown a bunch of extra challenge on your methylation system because you're stealing away all these methyl groups. So I think that conversation of those two enzymes together, they're working to both keep energy for the things that you don't need, right? CD38, I like to talk about this as like bad guys. So I talked about like the fat cells and the cancer cells and the senescent cells. What do all of those bad guys want? They want to stay turned on, number one, and they need energy to do so. So they've now just found their two favorite enzymes to help them do that, right? They've found CD38 to say, give me energy, give me NAD. And they've found NNMT to say, hey, methylate me, keep me turned on. And so if you have more of these bad guys in the system, and you add more nicotinamide, you add more NAD precursors, like you said, the holes in the bucket just keep leaking out. And you may keep pouring into the top, but it doesn't matter unless you plug those holes. So does that answer the question? Do you want me to go into those any more deeply?
Oh my gosh. Yes, you really cleared up for me. Let me repeat it so you can correct me where I've gone wrong, because CD38 is sort of like, that's the way I understand it gobbles up the NAD. And whereas the NNMT kind of stops NAD from being made in the first place. So you have coming from double whammy, two ends of two holes and the two large holes in this bucket that need to be plugged. And so they both contribute to inflammation. They both are keeping our fat cells inflammatory. They're keeping the cancer cells alive that want to have to be functioning. And then we have the senescent cells. And if people don't know what that is, that's these, what they call zombie cells. They're just cells that don't know if they should stay alive or die. And they're causing and wreaking havoc and inflammation and bothering all the other cells. We just want those to die. And so what we're doing by the CD38 and the NNMT are just fueling the fire that we don't need. And so it seems as though we're attacking or trying to get healthy through NAD, but it's not really the best way to approach it. It's probably better to inactivate CD38 and NNMT. Is that correct?
Exactly. And once you've kind of dealt with that, the underneath part of the conversation, then maybe it makes sense to put a couple precursors back into the system because they're going to, and not too much and not too fast, but that may make sense for that individual to get some more NAD on board. But it doesn't help you if you already have this inflammatory fire burning underneath. That's just going to burn up all that NAD.
Okay. So now let's talk about how can then we block these enzymes, preserve our NAD or recycle it naturally. Give me a couple things that are either free or low cost, and then what is the most effective?
Yeah. I mean, I think we always come back to, and as I get deeper into cellular science and I look more at these pathways, and you start to like actually understand why everyone says sleep and exercise are the answer to everything, because they work on so many different fundamental cellular pathways and regulating them. So the cliche answer, but I actually will go a level deeper as to why, but the cheap, easy ones are sleep and exercise, right?
But who does
And
that? Nobody does that.
I know those are no fun compared to all the fun tricks.
I know. It's the free stuff that nobody wants to do, but it's so good for everything, right?
Yep. It is. Every time you like go, oh, how do I fix this thing? How do I fix this thing? It's like, oh, well, sleep and exercise. But why? And maybe this will
Yeah.
convince us to do it more, myself included. But so there's this main enzyme that we didn't talk about that's kind of later in the NAD recycling called NAMPT. And this is just necessary for keeping that NAD salvage pathway going, right? So that I get access to that NAD. And so that enzyme is actually clock controlled, which is kind of interesting. So it's gene regulated clock controlled. So when you have a steady sleep wake rhythm, your cells will recycle NAD more efficiently.
Wow, that's amazing. I haven't heard that one yet. I heard a certain
Yeah, so it's kind of cool
box.
because it's like this actual enzyme is meant to happen at certain times. So if we kind of sleep consistently, then we see better recycling of our NAD.
So does it matter if we go to bed at 9 or if we go to bed at midnight, but as long as we do the same thing and wake up at the same time and assume
Yeah, I think as sleep
7
research has evolved more and more, like that's what we're learning. Yes, you need to get enough, but like especially getting up at the same time is the most important. Going to bed at the same time is also helpful, but what I've seen from the research is that getting up at the same time every day is really
Yeah.
gonna
It's
reset that system.
Yeah, I've interviewed so many sleep experts, and they just say, yeah, it's kind of like the number one thing to do is go to bed early, go not to bed early, go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time, and then yeah, waking up is more important. But I've noticed myself when you measure with your Aura Ring or your sleep scores, whatever devices I'm using, when I do that, everything's
It's all
crowns,
better.
high scores, bravo. What did you do today? And I wish I could have said it was that supplement or it was,
Right.
but it's the supplements are never as powerful as doing that. And it's sometimes so hard to do.
So hard. I know. I recently got from my Aura, like I've gotten a couple times where it's like, call an architect. You're busting through the roof today.
I heard that one. Yeah.
I'm like, all right, I got to do something special today.
Yeah, exactly. Call the architect. But it's Jim. Well, I get it. Okay, so that's something new. I didn't know that there's this circadian clock and this thing called NAMPT. So that's really cool. That's okay. Hack number one is
Sleep. Yep.
same
Sleep.
time. Yeah,
Consistent sleep. Yep.
yeah.
And then similarly, because it actually works on that same AMPT enzyme, is exercise for a slightly different reason. So both resistance training and aerobic, they give that stress signal that helps AMPK activation, helps with a mild reactive oxygen species, like the good stress that we always talk about.
Mhm.
And that also helps switch on this NAMPT. So both sleep and exercise are activating this key enzyme for NAD recycling. And so if we can better recycle our NAD, we don't need to feed a bunch into the top because our cell was designed to have this proper recycling system. It keeps properly executing the conversion of nicotinamide to NAM or to NAD, and our mitochondria are becoming more resilient. Our salvage pathway is completely functioning and we have more NAD on board to do what it needs to do. So those are the cheap and easy hacks.
Yeah, I know. And I like exercise. I'm lucky and I kind of enjoy doing that. And I know that my body feels so good after, but I bet there's some sweet spot when it comes to exercise because over exercising is inflammatory. So that's why my husband says, I don't even bother. Forget it.
Like I won't do it in case I overdo it.
But yeah, but so do we know when is it too much or what is the sweet spot in terms of resistance training and the aerobic? When did we
I,
cover?
Yeah, I think in general, the classic answer, everyone's going to be a little bit different. But I do think we as a kind of culture have moved more towards over exercise. Yes, there's a huge part of the population that needs to exercise more. But this classic more is better, right? More NAD is better, more exercise is better. You're kicking off too much reactive oxygen species. And now that whole oxidation reduction problem, right? We've created more oxidation or reactive oxygen species. So now we have to balance that out. So I think the sweet spot is really making sure to recover. Like that's the key. It's not necessarily that you've worked out too hard on that one workout. It's did you give your body, did you give your cells enough time to recover and actually find their way back to homeostasis? I was at a conference not that long ago where he said more and more it's looking like 3 times a week strength training is the magic number and daily movement and actually just going and moving about and getting walks in and that kind of thing.
And
But it's
that,
less than we thought it used to be.
yeah, interesting. Yeah, but I get it. It always depends on your goals as well. If you talk to people who want to gain muscle or get into a competition or whatever, they probably have to do more. But then, of course, there's always a trade-off. But in general, yeah, in my gerontology studies, we always say about 3 times a week and strength training, a bit of aerobic. We need flexibility, mobility, agility, all these things. It's hard to cram it all in, like so many hours in the day. But that's another great, okay, way to activate our NAMPT enzyme. I'm going to call it NAMPT from now
Yep.
on because it's easier. Okay, so cool. Those are the two free.
Yeah, so those are two, I mean, those are the two big ones because it helps with, again, that NAD salvage, which is how we get most of our NAD. Another, from more of kind of the diet side, the third part of the pillar, interestingly, and this is a whole different discussion, but like ketogenic diet, right? And keto, higher keto foods, by being in a more ketotic state, you actually ketosis and ketones, right, as the energy fuel source, they have this pretty interesting mechanism where they relieve your mitochondria is the simplest way to think of it. So that if you have a dysfunctional mitochondria, that ketone skips a step and becomes energy more quickly. And it allows your mitochondria to kind of heal and restore to properly use NADH and NAD. So ketones via keto diet, via fasting, if that works for your lifestyle, also have a benefit to helping with NAD because of the energy system that it's supporting.
So if people don't understand the keto diet or ketogenic diet, and it'd be interesting to know if it's like strict keto, there's also modified keto, but it's generally higher fat, moderate protein, and little to no carbs. So is this going to work better the more strict you are, or do we?
Yeah, I think the point is any ketones on board are going to be helpful. And so from a diet perspective, to actually get into ketosis state, to have blood ketones, right? And so it depends on the person how hard it is for them to get into more of a true ketosis that ketones are circulating in the blood. But it's not like you have to reach a magic number. It's kind of any ketone energy as a fuel source is going to be helpful because it, like I said, it relieves this normal process of your mitochondria having to produce energy through glucose, and that lets them kind of recover, if you will. So it's if you want to take exogenous ketones, you can do that. Any sort of ketones on board. And I'm not a huge proponent of, like for myself personally, I'm not like a hardcore faster. I tried that, it didn't work for me.
Me neither. I like to eat too much.
I like to eat too much too. And then I got sad and I was like, this isn't fun.
Yeah, I know. I get it. I get it. There's a whole other conversation about fasting and women. Unfortunately, and when we're going through a menopause, it's the same mentality: eat less, move more. It must be better for us, and then we have all kinds of trouble when we fast a little bit too long, and just kind of can backfire. So I'm always looking for ways. That's why I like spermidine, because then I get the benefits of autophagy, that cellular renewal and cleanup process, without having to fast. fast. So
Right. The cheats. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So I think ketones, however you want to get them, are just another option for helping with that NAD system.
All right. Okay. What else is there? Because as I understand, you mentioned earlier a molecule called 1-MNA. That's the number one, and then M is in Mary, N is in Nancy, A is an apple. Okay, because we're throwing out all these like
I know there's a
one
lot of
for
M and
that.
N's in this.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think there's two. So on the CD38 side and then on the NNMT side, we've actually found molecules that you can find in food or take supplementally that support both reduction and blocking of CD38 and then support the blocking of NNMT. I mentioned apigenin, that's one for the CD38 side. And then just in general, polyphenols that you're getting things like quercetin and you can get apigenin and parsley. And so there's foods out there. 1-MNA is actually a super interesting molecule. And so that's where I've spent a lot of my time kind of researching into this molecule, but it works on the NNMT side of the fence. It's naturally created in the body during NAD metabolism. So it has its own mechanism. The body has its own mechanism to create 1-MNA because it is the modulator of NNMT. So NNMT and 1-MNA go hand in hand. 1-MNA blocks NNMT. So when there's too much NNMT, we make more 1-MNA. 1-MNA blocks NNMT. The cell stays happy and balanced, right? 1-MNA, it's different than like an NAD precursor, like NR or NMN. Those are precursors, right? They happen before the cycle of creating NAD. 1-MNA, it's this methylated metabolite of nicotinamide. So it's happening downstream. So it happens after, I call it a post-cursor, but it's downstream of NAD metabolism because it's happening in that salvage pathway.
Mhm.
So that's a key distinction. People will sometimes put 1-MNA as like a precursor. It's not. It's more of like a hole plugger than it is a bucket filler, if
Yeah, I
you
was
will.
just going to say that. I literally was going to say it's probably, yeah, the a hole plugger. Then okay, cool.
Yep, exactly. So it supports that balance. So by blocking NNMT, a lot of our problems that we talked about, NNMT is over methylate or stealing methyl groups. So if I can inhibit NNMT, I can allow proper methylation. I can spare NAD from being chewed up too quickly. And you protect both your methyl groups and your nicotinamide to make more NAD. So that whole idea of I don't have enough of the molecule to make NAD, well, now I can spare that to make NAD. I can also spare my methyl groups for my neurotransmitters, for my DNA, for the things that you actually want to methylate and keep going.
So it's like having an alarm system on your house so the robbers don't come in and steal your money that you could be spending on something else.
Exactly. Yep.
Love these. We can create
Right.
analogies all day long.
You have to. When you talk like about the cellular pathways, the only way I've found I can do it is analogies. But yes, exactly. It's the alarm system saying, hey, no, you can't do this right now. I have to protect what's here. I have to protect proper recycling. I have to keep supporting repair energy, all the good stuff.
Okay. So 1-MNA, then that's to block the NNMT. And you said apigenin is another molecule that we supplement that you can get to block the CD38, and that should be plugging some of the holes. Is that correct?
Yep,
In
that's
addition to the
and
lifestyle and diet and all that stuff.
yeah, exactly. And lifestyle diet. And I think we'll learn a lot in the next couple of years, even because this conversation has become more popular. And a lot of research is looking at making NNMT inhibitors, making CD38 inhibitors. Like I know actually Eric Verdin of the Buck Institute, he's working on something to block CD38 because he's recognized that's important. So I think we'll have more options. I don't know how many of them are going to come out as drugs. That'll cost us a lot of money, but
Yeah.
we
You mentioned though that 1-MNA is something our body makes naturally, correct? So
yep.
that sounds pretty cool. Like I'm on board with that. And when I had this friend, I think I told you earlier, who loves this NAD and I wanted to try it. And then I got the message that I probably shouldn't be doing this. Yeah, and for many, many reasons. But I got the 1-MNA and I got sorry, this is the 1-MNA. In case you're on YouTube, you can see this. And then I got the apigenin, and I was like, okay, now I'm on board. If I was going to do this, if I'm going to inject myself, then I should probably also blocking these pathways. But I got the message I shouldn't be doing this, and I just So I'm very uncomfortable with injecting myself. I don't like doing this. And I tell no reason for me to be doing it. Like, everything's to be pretty good with me right now. But
Right. You're a pretty healthy person, so like you just need to do the normal maintenance of blocking those enzymes that are just happening because of life, right? And then would be restoring your proper NAD recycling. So in theory, unless then maybe if you did a really long hike, take a little bit of NR to help refill the bucket, that's more of the balance that you need is you're as a healthy person, you don't need a bunch of NAD on board.
yeah, I just didn't feel it was right. But now I still have this bottle of 1-MNA. And now I'm wondering, should I be taking this? I know this is not medical advice at all, but for somebody like me who's probably listening, is this kind of like a little insurance that we should be doing on and off, or taking it every single day, like you would an omega or whatever it is that people need? And the apigenin as well. Do we just
Yeah. I
things?
mean, from my perspective, yes, they're daily maintenance products. You obviously can increase the dosing when you have a sickness or an illness or something you're trying to recover from. But that system of because our bodies naturally have CD38 and NNMT. It's not like in and of themselves they're bad. It's when they're in excess, right? Or they're overstimulated. That's where our problems are going to lie. And so we need to keep that in check because just the inertia of our lives, right? I always kind of think of it that way. Just getting older, just being in the world that's more and more toxic, we are under more and more stress. And so you have to protect those systems kind of to counteract the daily stressors by doing daily maintenance. It's like if you don't clean your house, I wipe down the counters every single day and then I'll deep clean it once in a while. But if I didn't wipe down the counters for 2 weeks, I'd have a lot more cleaning I'd have to do. I'd have to really recover from that mess. And so I think that's how I think of a lot of this stuff is you're always kind of fighting an uphill battle because of the nature of the world. And it doesn't matter if you're 100% perfect, like you have to live and breathe our air and like go,
Mhm.
unless you don't do any of if you have only filtered air, if you never leave your house, like maybe then there's an argument that you don't need any
Could
supplements.
be good. And yeah, then you have other problems because you have
Right.
social life and we're social beings generally. And that's, yeah, a whole other thing. The no supplement will save you in that case. And
Exactly.
um,
Right. That's what like isn't community actually the biggest indicator of longevity, like
it
having
is.
good people and good communities. So
Yeah.
if you're going to go out in the world, then I think you need some 1-MNA and apigenin as a maintenance dose to just keep blocking NNMT, blocking CD38, keep your NAD recycling pathway optimized.
Well, one thing I would definitely, I mean, I learned as well from Boulder Longevity Institute and the team out there. And as I was exploring this NAD thing, is that I was recommended if you are going to take any kind of NAD IV or injection, is definitely have the 1-MNA and apigenin on board to offset any of the damage, or possible damage. But I understand now then I can still continue and I would take this. The dosage is one capsule a day. I don't remember how many milligrams, but do you do this every day for a month and then stop for a couple of months and then bring it on board? Or you do it only the days that you're highly stressed, you're not sleeping well, you're not doing your exercise? Like, how would you dosage 1-MNA?
I mean, I think you could take it every day at a maintenance dose at 1 cap a day. It's not something that has to be cycled because you're always going to have some NNMT on board that you're kind of looking to inhibit because we have more than we need. I'm a big fan of supplement cycling just in general, right? I think every supplement could be cycled a little bit, give your body a break, let it sort of find its own homeostasis, rebalance, then add back into the system. That goes to that whole stressor, small little stressors here and there. So that's kind of what I do. I mean, I typically take my supplements for 4 to 6 weeks and then take a week or two off just for my sanity, for my paycheck.
I know we get pill fatigue, to be honest.
Yeah. I do think it's an important one though for your kind of, because we said NAD is in every single cell. It's obviously super, super important. Optimizing this system will have a very like pleiotropic effect. And that's what I look for in my supplements is like, are we hitting a lot of things at once? Or are we really just like, I'm improving this one thing? And that helps me prioritize them. I know I get a bigger bang for my buck if I'm supporting a multi-system effect like what M&A does to support NAD, which helps my DNA, which helps my PARPs, which helps my sirtuins, etc. So that's kind of how I prioritize it.
So have you seen a lot of people go through 1-MNA using this supplement now? And what are you seeing? Is it kind of a supplement you're like, oh, I don't feel anything, or do actually people feel something as well as the apigenin as well? And what's the difference?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely less of the immediate feel type of products, which is one of the challenges in getting adoption for them. Some of the anecdotal stuff I've heard is really compelling. So I think people, depending on how sick they are, will start to feel impacts within, if they're really sick, maybe 2 to 3 weeks. If they're less sick, 4 to 6 weeks. But there's a lot of really subtle stuff that we've heard people give us feedback. For example, one guy who was taking the supplement for, I want to say it was 6 weeks, and he hikes the same mountain in his neighborhood every day. And he always hikes it in like 36 minutes and 40 seconds or whatever it is. And then he said after taking the product for several weeks, he reduced his hike time by like 12 seconds.
Oh, wow.
So it's a very like subtle difference, but that's kind of a great
Oh,
indicator of NAD is more available.
did you say 12 seconds or 12 minutes?
12 seconds.
Oh, okay, okay. Okay. And
So
you,
yeah, not 12 minutes.
I was like,
But like that's
wow,
a very
12 minutes.
subtle, yeah. And those numbers may be off, but like it was basically he had it so regimented that
Yeah.
he was like, I do it like this every single day. And the only thing that's changed, and this was the fastest I'd hiked it, and I got it much faster because I was on this supplement, is essentially what he said.
Well, if you're in the Olympics, 12 seconds is huge, right? That's the advantage. But split
Right.
second is already huge. And you could win the gold
Right. So
medal
it's
within.
like little things, but they show your cells are working better just a little bit.
And that's the 1-MNA. Have you heard any anecdotes from the apigenin being on board?
I think the apigenin, you'll see more of the, I mean, both of them because of the homocysteine connection to NNMT and 1-MNA, but the CD38 is inflammatory, right? So you can have reduction in those inflammation markers that we were talking
Mm.
about. I'm not as close to that product, like I don't know as many people on it. But I've heard through our clinical contacts that like they're seeing reduction in a lot of those inflammation markers.
Do you see any reduction in cholesterol levels when they're too high with 1-MNA?
Well, 1-MNA has yeah, because it has this really interesting one, it works on triglycerides. So you do see improvement kind of across the board there. And then also it's deeply researched on the cardiac side of things. So I know it's not directly related, but basically you have this improved vasodilation. So you have this improved endothelial function where the lining of your blood vessels is improved to allow for less, what's the word? Basically, coagulation, things that can influence your heart health. So there's quite a bit of research. It's actually one of the main places that we've seen 1-MNA looked at is on the cardiac side, and then that also spills into more of the cholesterol side as well.
Okay. I've got one more question. I'm going to let you go because I got the 1-MNA and I got this one, the endurance. And I like it because I told you I have a little bit of pill fatigue and
Yeah.
it's sachet and it's got creatine in there and the 1-MNA. So is this because it's the same brand and because
Mhm.
I couldn't find 1-MNA anywhere except this one company. And so I was happy to get it, but I didn't realize that the same company also makes different. It was a couple of different things, actually, different formulations. But did you try this one before?
I have tried that one. Yeah, we don't have that one in the States yet, but hopefully soon. But I have tried it through the European partners that have it. So it's super cool. I mean, we all have been hearing a ton about creatine, right? Creatine has gotten also really popular, but I have less reserves about creatine than I do about NAD. I think for the most part, the hype actually lives up to the research.
Mhm.
But the reason why they're paired together, why 1-MNA and creatine are paired together, is that creatine is known for buffering ATP because it reduces the reliance on that NADH, right? So kind of like I was talking about with ketones, where there's this skipping effect. It's sort of similar, but you can reduce reliance on NADH shuttling. So then you improve that NAD plus NADH ratio that is helping with your NAD system not getting too overtaxed. So it's kind of and that's kind of where creatine and NAD play together. And so that's why if you hit from both sides with the 1-MNA, blocking the NNMT, and then you add the creatine to support NADH shuttling, now you've got this ultra optimized version for NAD.
Do you know if the bottle of just pure 1-MNA versus the sachets that have 1-MNA in it, is it the same dosage as each other?
I think so. I'm pretty sure they're both 58 milligrams, which is kind of the standard
Yeah.
daily dose.
Okay. I think so. Yeah, it is. Okay, so I don't need to take them both. I can just take one or the other. I love it because I needed a new thing of creatine and I saw this and I'm like, okay, I can now get 1-MNA and creatine at the same time.
Yep.
But I don't remember the price. Do you know the prices of these? Because
I don't know what they are in Europe. I think it's a little bit market specific.
uh,
It's definitely cheaper than NAD infusions. I'll say that much.
yes, definitely. I know it was reasonable. I just can't remember what it was.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in that like 69 to 89 a bottle USD, which is right around the same as some of your NRs and NMNs that are going to be higher quality. So you're basically, the way I think of it is it's a much better bang for your buck because you're preserving your NAD versus potentially wasting some of it by just throwing it into the top.
Okay, cool. Well, if anybody's interested, there's a website called 1mna.com. That's one, the number one, and then M for Maria, N for Nancy, A for Apple.com. And we managed to get 20% off the first purchase. And it's a company it's called Endotelio. And is there anything else I should know about this company? Because you know about it better than me.
Yeah, I think I mean, they're the OGs, if you will. The main researcher was really the guy who helped discover the molecule. We used to look at it as really just a urine metabolite for vitamin B back in the day. And then we started to realize, oh, it's got all these other effects, including, like I said, some of the cardiac side, a lot of work on the inflammation side. It actually can even work doing some of the things that NAD does. But they're the guys that have really started the research of it. And then since then, the research has kind of grown across the world. But so there's a lot of other people who have looked at it, not just them. So that's the company out of Europe is the most vetted, I guess, place to get it.
Cool. And I also have you can go to ohphealth.com and I have a link to that in the show notes because I know that's the way you get it in the US, which was a little different than from me. But I'm so grateful. Everything that I learned from you today, you've cleared up so much confusion. And
Good. I hope so.
gosh, yeah, I think I'm really starting to get a hold of all of this. And I think it's super useful for anyone who's considering NAD or just wants to improve their NAD levels. And just been giving us some really practical tips as well, things that are free. You can get the supplement, you can change your diet. There's just so many things we can do. But before I let you go, is there anything else you'd like to share before you leave?
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll leave with, because we talk a lot about complicated pathways and a lot of letters and things like that. The deeper, like I said, I've gotten into cellular medicine and cellular science, it actually becomes more simple because you realize that the cell is just really intelligent. And I think we lose sight of that. And a lot of times in our biohacking world, and you said this pill fatigue, we keep trying more and more things. And sometimes we forget, okay, what does the cell actually need? So I think this conversation about fewer heroics, as I like to say, more intelligent design. When does the cell need to be nudged? When does the cell need support? When does the cell need to be left alone? Like that's something that as we become more in tune with our bodies and paying more intuitive attention to kind of what we're consuming and where we are, we'll get better about. And it's not just, I hear something and I should do it. So I think that's kind of my final to let everybody remember it's okay. You don't have to do everything you hear about. And maybe sometimes it's best to just do nothing.
Yes, I love that. I love it. I appreciate all the time that you spent with me. I appreciate everybody who's listened to the end of the podcast and you're still here with us. You're obviously just as interested in this episode, in this topic as I am. And I hope things are more clear for you. And if you need any guidance or anything, I'll have links to how to reach out to Courtney, how to ask more questions. And yeah, and let me know. And I'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zora. Appreciate it.